The Broken Brain is proud this month to highlight the charity Stand in Pride, which was founded by Daniel Blevins and is an organization that helps members of the LGBTQ plus community to find stand-ins or found family and friends, particularly when the coming out process has caused people to withdraw from their lives. And they might find that they need a stand-in family and friends to attend weddings, funerals, receptions, graduations, things of that nature, and on a deeper level to create that social support system that they, like all of us, need and crave. You can find the Stand in Pride app, which is a way to join and to volunteer and follow through to be an ally or to find people who are there for you. Go to your app store for your phone and look up Stand in Pride. You can follow Daniel Blevins on Instagram or TikTok at _zombie_Dan and learn more about this this local charity that he started. It's a local charity that also has, international reach due to the technology and app. You can learn more about and support their program by going to standinpride.org. Download the app. You can donate. You can also buy merch that they have available as well. If you choose to support The Broken Brain and joining our Patreon at patreon.com/brokenbrain, as always, whatever charity we are highlighting in the month that you join, 50% of your donation will always go to that charity for the duration of your membership. Enjoy the show. The Broken Brain.
Recording in progress.
Left me nervous there for a second. Zoom was thinking about whether or not it wanted to start recording, and thankfully we are seeing eye to eye today. Me and Zoom, that is. Welcome everybody back to The Broken Brain. Really glad to have everybody out there listening for today's look at the intersection of psychology and culture. And in this case, we are talking in particular about the role of spirituality that plays in there, as well as many other things that relate to that. Very honored today to be joined by Salima Adelstein, who is a Chadaliya Sufi guide that is also the co-founder of the University of Sufism, which I'm looking forward to getting into, talking about spiritual approaches to emotional pain, compassion, healing, trauma, and you also work a lot with education. And it says that you worked with thousands and thousands of healthcare professionals, clergy, spiritual healers, therapists, and looking at insights that come from the spiritual practice of Sufi, which I'm very excited to learn about. I was not familiar with and will be more after this conversation. Salima, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you. It's quite an honor. Appreciate it very much.
Well, let's see. Could you introduce yourself to everybody and let them know a little bit about yourself and how did you get into this spiritual guide and this kind of work that you do?
Like anything in life, it came to me rather than me seeking it. The name Salima was actually given to me by a Sufi guide in Palestine who I met on the many travels that I had been going on, from India to Europe to all over the world, actually, kind of seeking truth and seeking a higher consciousness and real meaning in life. And somebody mentioned that the Sufi master guide from Palestine was in town. I was teaching in New Mexico at the time, and perhaps I'd like to meet him. And I knew nothing about Sufism at the time. I was kind of in your shoes. It's like, what is Sufism? Knew a lot about meditation, knew a lot about consciousness, but not much about Sufism.
It's related. When I looked it up, it occurred to me how ignorant a lot of times those of us who maybe didn't grow up in that system or in the Western world are to the different factions of Islam. That Islam is like saying, someone told me a long time ago that saying Islam is like saying Christianity and then assuming that everybody belongs to one organization.
Well, like Christianity or Judaism, most religions have a mystical side to it that transcends the religion itself. And that's Sufism's relationship to Islam. That Sufism is known as the mystical aspect of Islam, but it transcends the religion in that it says that all religions have an inner truth and all human beings have a knowledge within themselves that seeks to become more than who we think we are and the essence of who we are in truth. And that's what Sufism is all about. So you don't have to belong to the Islamic faith, the Jewish faith. You can be an agnostic, you can be an atheist, and still benefit from the Sufi practices and the Sufi way of life, because it's really about being a better person and cultivating some of the more divine qualities within us, having more compassion, having more empathy, having more love, having more of a more inner wisdom to know truth and be able to discern truth from falsehood.
Yeah, that's an important difference that people have is spirituality disconnected or at least not necessarily connected to any type of an organizational structure. I find that, it's interesting because sometimes people have various experiences with the practical application of that. I work with a lot of addiction, and depending on the groups people go to, if they are in community support groups, particularly 12-step support groups, they have a real emphasis on spirituality. But some people are hesitant because they don't know. It seems they don't really believe. It's like, can I have spirituality if I don't have a religion? Or if I do have a religion, is a different flavor of spirituality? And then depending on the experiences they have, for example, in 12 steps, which group do they go to? Is it like, hey, we're all cool, it's really the Christian God, right? Okay, great, let's move on. And it's like, whoa, hold on. No, it's supposed to find something bigger than yourself. And how do you interpret and define that? Through your studies and experience, how would you define a concept of spirituality?
The concept of spirituality really has to do with knowledge, the intersection of knowledge and, how can I describe it? The intersection of knowledge and belief. And in that, we find truth. And I've been a seeker of truth most of my life. So when we find truth and when we hear truth, we know it. And as you said, spirituality is about connecting with something bigger than yourself. There was a beautiful quote by Jane Goodall, I know recently she passed on, but she said, I don't know whether or not there's a God or not, but every time I look at nature and the world, I know that there's something greater than myself. And that's what we're really talking about, that there's something greater than ourselves. In my world, I would use the word God. In other people, they may use the word divine. They may use the word universe. They may use different words to convey this same concept of something that is greater than ourselves, that is the essence of why we're here and what our purpose is, and finding meaning in our life.
What can you talk about that application as it comes primarily to healthcare and for those professions as you go around and train people that are, kind of specializing in helping with, these different aspects of psychological, medical, people in those needs. How did you get to a point where you started to connect those and that became part of your mission? Is that a good way to say it?
Yeah, sure. The beautiful part of Shadaliya Sufism is it's not just the spiritual practices, but it also has a very strong healing component. And in that healing component, we call it Sufi spiritual healing, we're looking at what is the root cause of what's happening in either a disease state are in a trauma state or in an addiction state. There's something sort of missing. There's like something that we're trying to fill, and we're looking sort of outside of ourselves to try to fill that. And inevitably, when we look outside for something, it's never quite going to fill that gap. So, what Sufism teaches is how to go in and find that inner light, that inner love, that inner place of safety. For most people, issues around safety become really important, issues around trust. How do we find that within? So that it becomes a journey within and not necessarily through our beautiful minds or broken brain, as your podcast is called, but through the wisdom of our heart. And that was the biggest teaching for me, having grown up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where intellect is foremost, is how do I switch my intention? How do I switch my attention into what's going on within my heart? And when I began to look at what's going on within my heart, I found that I had lots of pictures around Islam, right? Having grown up in the Jewish tradition, I was always taught those folks are your enemy, stay away. And here I am studying with a Sufi master who's an Islamic sheikh. And all of those pictures around they're different, they're terrorists, they're people I should hate and be afraid of were broken because they were acting like walls within my heart that were keeping me from knowing the oneness and the unity of all creation. And that's the beauty that Sufism brings. It gives you direct experience. So I could talk about it for hours. I could give your readers lots of different books, but it's not about book learning and it's not about lectures. It's about actually having a direct experience with the divine, with God, with something higher than yourself that fulfills a need that you have, that you've always wanted, that you're looking for something outside to fill that never quite is enough.
Was your preconceived notions, how was that difficult then to start engaging with a Sufi guide when people start talking about it? Or
oh yeah, I was
how did you overcome that? Yeah, because you had to probably make some decision to overcome it before you were, as you put it, the principles or doctrines you were learning helped to melt away those perceptions. But you must have had a time where you had to make a choice in order to even open yourself to learn that much, right?
Sure. And the first aspect of that happened the very moment that I met him. That I had been in India studying with a bunch of gurus and very much in a kind of namaste, I salute the peace in you and you salute the peace in me. And here I meet, an Islamic Sufi sheikh. And the first thing he does is give me a hug. Unheard of in the Islamic world, unheard of in the world that I just left in India. And in that moment of that hug, something broke open in my heart. And Rumi says that when the heart breaks, I don't know if you've ever heard of the poet Rumi, very popular nowadays.
Yeah.
But when the heart breaks is where the light comes in. And that was my first real experience. I've had many sort of out-of-body experiences in meditation, but this is the first experience that I had of the light within. And having that light, which later became deep love and an unconditional love and an empathy and a compassion for all of humanity, whether I knew about them, whether I liked them or not, and changed my reality, which then formed I want to teach this to everybody I know, because, we can be, I work with many psychotherapists and many therapists, and they may be with people for 3 to 5 to 10 years in therapy. And what they found in using these Sufi spiritual practices and Sufi spiritual principles is that things move a lot faster for the person because we're taking what we would call wounds or stains in the heart and washing them and purifying them with the deep love, with the deep compassion, and literally taking them and washing them, just like we wash our clothes to get clean. It's like our heart is being washed by these Sufi practices. And you get to see a clearer image, a clearer perception of your life and the life around you. I don't know if you ever experienced this as a kid, but you know those circus mirrors and fun mirrors where we say
Oh,
like
the
a heart.
distortion mirrors, the wave that make you look
Yeah,
tall,
yeah,
bigger, smaller, whatever.
you got it. Well, our heart is like that mirror, and we have many distorted perceptions.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not good enough, right? I haven't perfected what I need to perfect in my life. I'm disappointing people. I'm behaving in ways that are self destructive to myself. Those are distortions of the essence of who we are in truth. And what the Sufi spiritual practices do is begin to return those and help us remember. We say that the Sufi path is about remembrance and being reminded of who we are in truth. In order to do that, we need to empty and let go of all those falsehoods within us, of all those false beliefs, of all the ways that we think I've made a mistake and therefore I'm awful, right?
That the damage kind of thing, as some people refer to that kind of like psychological scarring or bumps in the road that we get bruised or hurt, right, in that emotional way. So we go to emotions and we go to emotional reactions and we find that pain that's there. And then, and I find that when we're in a place of pain, we tend to maybe go back and forth between being full of shame or maybe going the other direction. And we either kind of retreat from that pain and don't really process it, or oftentimes we lean into it and use it as a decision maker for us. And that's where I think self-destructive choices come in with whatever it is that we are dealing with. We're less likely to make good decisions in pain or when we're avoidant of pain. At least that's my perspective on how we do that.
Yeah, we either get caught in shame or blame rather than focusing on what's real and focusing on, we have our lower human nature, right? What we might call our animal nature. We need to eat, we need to defecate, we need to survive. But those are not the essence of who we are. And then we have our divine nature, which is our higher consciousness and our higher evolution. And that's what makes connection and unity and empathy and compassion become the cornerstones of peace within. And when we have peace within, one of the Sufi principles is what's inside gets reflected outside. So the more that we wash, the more that we empty, the more that we look at where are those separations within us and how do we bring them into wholeness? How do we bring them into oneness? The more we can find inner peace inside. And then hopefully we begin to see peace outside or not be so affected by what's going on in the world, and we know right action.
It reminds me of something I was taught, and I was taught several times by a few different people that this principle. I had a clinical supervisor after my graduation. I had a couple of professors somewhere along the line in counseling classes and such that talk about one of the important differences if something is therapy versus if it's just maybe social advocacy or maybe a social work type of approach. I realize there's a lot of everybody out there who's an LCSW, clinical social workers. Don't come at me. I don't mean also you guys do therapy too, but just searching for a better term. What I was taught is therapy is about working on, as you're putting as you call it, like the inside, or working on the psychological health and the emotional health, and then taking that out into the world. Not so much about. There are times where it is very beneficial to get practical knowledge about go apply for this program or whatever it is when people are in need, or some job seeking skill work or things like that. But that's not therapy, is the idea that I was taught. That's not psychological kind of treatment. That is a, practical application and learning. And it's important not to judge one or the other, I guess, but to know the division. Are we talking about here's some tools to work with the external world? And I think that bleeds into therapy a lot of times when you get into we're teaching skills only, instead of also then focusing on what's the internal processes. And you're talking about kind of focusing inward. And I'm really interested in the belief of what we find there. You're talking about finding an internal wisdom and internal healing. It sounds like that is the belief is that would be pre-existent. We're discovering it, not creating it. Am I interpreting that right, is what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. And the other thing that I particularly love about Sufism is it's not just the inner. It's the inner that then allows you to see the world and see your place in it differently. And that's what makes for me, the real difference between sort of the mindfulness or meditation that has its value. But I found, for me personally, there was something missing in that. And the missing piece for me was that intersection between the inner, and when the inner changes, the effects on the outer. And we see that a lot in the university. When people are working on, let's say, for example, a family issue or a family problem that they may have had, they find that without even talking to either their sibling, their parents, or their children, change happens just by changing something within themselves. And for me, that's almost miraculous to see it happen so quickly. I'm in awe of it. And why I love the work that we do with both therapists and healthcare professionals, as well as people that just need the healing. So the people that come to our university come from all stratas of life. They're professionals, they're non-professionals, they're people that need healing, they're people that want to heal others. They're people that want to be ministers or chaplains in hospital settings, helping people in the dying process. We have a beautiful expression, sometimes it can be funny too, of die before you die is one of the principles in Sufism. Well, what does that mean, to die before you die? Take a moment, let your audience or you think about that.
It reminds me actually of a Christian principle too. People talk about lose your life to find it. That reminds me of that. It's a biblical term, right? And I'm sure there's other traditions that have that concept. But yeah, that's. Can you break that down a little for people, and how do you teach that?
Because when we're so focused on our ego, when we're so focused on our I, that begins to drive our life. When we die physically, that I leaves us. And all that's left is our spirit, our soul. Why not discover that now before you die?
When you're approaching that, as you're coming upon people, and maybe my background, of course, right, in therapy. So if I come in and I'm learning some of these principles, how do I bring this into work with people? What are some ways, how would I, if I'm going to start using that with people, how would I do that?
So the first thing is to help people discern. Discernment becomes really an important part of this whole process. So, the first thing I might recommend is to discern what we might call in Sufism the voices. What are the voice of myself? What are the voice of my I? Right? So I begin to know, oh, this is the voice of my ego talking. I want this. I want a big house. I want a new car. I want, right? Whatever. Then there's the voice of what I would call the whisperer. And the whisperer is an outside voice that whispers to us, you're not good enough to have that new car. You just got yourself in trouble. You're a bad person. You just made that big mistake. You're never going to finish grad school, whatever it is. We all know those outside voices that operate within us, right?
And that kind of externalizes then the voices of shame and things to say this is where we're taught that. Is that, am I getting that from the experiences or from people telling us? Yeah.
Exactly, right? And then there's the voice of what I would call the divine within or divine guidance. And what we teach is how to recognize those voices because they all exist. And then which one do we want to choose to pay attention to? And how do we alleviate this outside voice? How do we begin to create a boundary and a safety so this voice never gets inside? For many people, that voice internalizes with the voice of the ego and it becomes inseparable. Part of the work of the Sufi practices is to begin to separate those out so people can discern the difference. And then through a Sufi practice that I can't get into now because it's a bit too long, but we will be giving your audience a little free gift called the 5 C's of Inner Truth. And this practice will be in that for your audience to practice. It's called the practice of remembrance. And it's bringing a sacred name that has a certain vibration to it into those places within us that are in pain or in separation or needing to get that voice, outside voice, far enough away so that we can hear the voice of divine within.
So there's a focus on the externalization versus the external voice and the internal. Then in that belief, we'd be looking at the internal. It sounds like as the internal, you call it like the divine state. Would you say like kind of the natural state before these negative experiences and interventions would be healing and healthy? Is that we're looking at that and not? Do you find as part of that the way that we learn to, because we learn over time to practice that negativity even without the presence of someone telling us, right? If we're told something that the old saying, if you're told you're stupid your whole life, you start to believe it, right? So then
Sure,
I'm doing the work for the person, even if let's say it was a parent who was abusive or they're gone, maybe they're even dead, but I'm still doing that work that I was trained to do on myself. Does that make sense? That's the way I look. I conceptualize that way, and I wonder how that fits into what you're describing.
Sure. If I maybe this will help. If we look at the heart as a hologram or a way of assessing what's happening within our entire body and our entire world outside. And when I talk about the heart, I'm not talking about that physical organ. I'm talking about our spiritual heart, which is much larger than our physical heart. But the way we connect to that is through our physical heart, is through our breath, right? Is through our heartbeat. Mm-hmm. And that heartbeat has a rhythm to it. And we know that when we're anxious, it speeds up, right? When we're scared, it speeds up, right? How do we begin to pay attention to that? And then that becomes a doorway that leads us deeper. It's open.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. So in that doorway that leads us deeper, We say that there are treasures within our heart. There are jewels within our heart that make you, you, and make me, me, right? That we all have gifts and talents that the divine has given us in this physical body to use here on the earth.
So
How do
then,
we begin to discover those within us so our life becomes more meaningful and more fulfilling and more satisfying and more joyful? Right? There's not enough joy in the world right now, if you ask me.
sure, and I think that there's a lot of threats to that as we go through life, and we see those threats. And a lot of times, and I've had many people who've come on have talked about even just finding moments of joy, right? And I see that reflected in a lot of approaches to helping people is trying to first embrace, as you put it, where that negativity comes from or where that self-destructive or external voices, identifying that it's there, and then also and I think finding things that are healthy can be a more powerful emphasis than creating. Obviously, there's things that we do and things that we act upon and that we can, but a lot of that really, even that is discovering things that sort of work for us and click. And I think there's that hopefully relationship with the internal that as you're talking, I'm getting the idea that this belief also is that we're trying to be healthy. And that ties in with something I believe a lot, which is we're reacting to the world because we have internal parts of us. And I find that sometimes the people who do the most self-destructive actions or even lash out at others, when you really get down to it, are some of the most emotionally sensitive people. But people don't give them that feedback when they're hurting themselves and others and say, well, you seem really emotionally sensitive. And I find when I say that to people, they're often like, what are you talking about? Everybody says I'm a selfish bastard or whatever. And trying to get into that, it's like, no, you've been damaged, you've been hurt, you're reacting to that in a lot of ways. If that makes sense.
And that's why most people don't want to go into their heart, because there is so much pain there. And giving them a safety to be able to go in and explore and heal that part is life transforming. I remember someone who came to the university, and she was really just struggling and not really feeling good about herself. And as we were doing some of the Sufi practices in class, she noticed that she had never forgiven herself for giving up her child when she was a teenager, and obviously couldn't take care of the child, so she gave it up. And through this Sufi spiritual healing, what she discovered was, I can look for that child now. And after 20 years, she found this child that she gave up. And the two of them now are part of a larger family. And it totally changed her whole way of being. She was able to forgive herself for that, and was able to find the joy of this child that she had gave up many years ago. And that's some of the ways that I've experienced Sufism changing people's lives and then changing the world that they live in. And that's why I love working with therapists so much, because therapists are in a position of seeing people in those struggles and helping them through it. And by adding the spiritual component, it just opens up new vistas for the therapeutic model.
As you're saying that, it reminds me of, you said earlier, you noticed as the healing was happening that there was a feeling of empathy. And empathy, of course, then when we're interacting with a sense of family, community, other people, right? As the healing takes place, that sounds like that's one of the ways that people start to naturally experience that when you say that empathy for other people.
Exactly. And it even goes, from my experience, it even goes beyond empathy. And in my words, I would say being able to see the world through God's eyes. And that's a very different experience than we see the world through our human eyes. That all of a sudden something that may look terrible and may look awful, there may be a hidden wisdom in it that we're not aware of. But through these Sufi practices that we do, it begins to transform and begins to see things from a different perspective that allows you to understand, oh, maybe that's why this particular transition that I had in life, this particular trajectory that I had in life happened the way it happened, right?
So there's a piece there of acceptance then, it sounds like. Acceptance, I find, it's a concept that we think is simple, but it's one of the hardest things to do, which is truly accept, particularly things that I don't like very much that happened, and trying to find what it is part of my story and my experience, and I don't have to necessarily like it. I think you're talking about, if I'm understanding right, more of an acceptance approach of saying, yeah, I accept that this is it, and also I can accept the things that I've been through have had an influence on who I am. I mean, that would be a way a lot of people, it seems like you're talking about maybe a deeper spirituality attached to that type of acceptance.
Exactly. And it's also understanding that there is what I would call a tapestry of our life. And oftentimes we get attached to one thread of the tapestry and begin to judge one thread. Oh, I've got this dark thread in the tapestry of my life. I've got to somehow get rid of this dark thread in my tapestry. And what the higher consciousness that Sufism provides for people is giving a deeper understanding and a deeper wisdom and a deeper guidance of how that one thread fits into the tapestry of your life. And then it has more meaning rather than judging it as, poor me, I'm a victim, this happened, there's not, right? It makes you powerless rather than gives you an empowerment of understanding and an empowerment of, and audience, don't get mad at me when I use this word, an empowerment of surrender to what is.
Well,
we can't go back and change our past, but we can learn from those experiences that will then help us understand what I'm calling this tapestry of life, that will then affect, what am I doing here on earth? And how is this part of my mission? How is this part of my purpose here? So that I feel successful in this world, knowing that I've created the life that's meaningful for me based on all these beautiful gifts that I've been given throughout my life.
It's interesting how you clarified that, the concept of surrender. Do you find that we have a resistance to that, as you were kind of maybe trying to get people to listen to the word? What would you say about, what do you think we resist about that concept of surrender? Accepting what is.
Yeah, I think for me, it has to do with what I've observed over the years in the teaching in the university, is it has to do with people's need for control. And the ego loves control. And when we surrender, we're giving up that control to something greater. And that's not easy for the ego to do. That's not easy for us as humans to just say, let go.
It can be scary, right? I mean, it's a fearful process, particularly if we already feel out of control. And I think with trauma, often that's a complicating factor, is the especially if it's an unexpected trauma or if it's something that when we're very young and when we literally don't have very much control over our lives, but someone exercises or something exercises control, and then to go with that concept. It's interesting as you say that. My approach to the concept of what I think we're very closely aligned when we're talking. I usually talk about acceptance in a therapeutic way. You're taking that into that kind of deeper spiritual way. So it's interesting how they complement each other. I always define true acceptance isn't necessarily approval or, enjoyment of things that have happened, because that I think is impossible in many ways. And maybe not, to say, oh, that was right, that happened to me. That's different than saying I learned from that happening to me, I think. And
Exactly, yeah.
I've always
We're
defined
not
that as making decisions based off what is instead of what we wish was. But anyway, yeah.
Mhm. Right. And being able to say no. If somebody is being abused, you don't say, oh, yeah, keep up and keep letting yourself be abused because that's just what is, right? You have to learn to set those boundaries and that's that outside voice, right? To say, no, no, thank you.
And
Right.
that's the fear. I think that's where the fear comes in, is people think of acceptance or surrender in this term, which is also big in the addiction world when they talk about this idea of surrendering to what we do control versus what we don't control, and all that concept. And ultimately, a lot of philosophical, even parts of philosophy that influence therapy, is accepting how little, if anything, I really do have control over, and trying to live in a world that does not guarantee me a world, a universe, whatever. It doesn't guarantee me anything. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't control a lot of it. And then trying, that's exactly right. I think the fear comes in where people are like, well, does that mean that I have to accept and so I should just be okay with stuff? And it's like, no. In fact, I find that real acceptance of what is actually leads to a greater likelihood of healthy change. Because then we accept, like, I can make decisions. What is I'm in this situation and I shouldn't be, I don't want to be. And so now I have to make decisions based off that instead of just kind of pretending it's okay, or even having that more, I'd call shallow version of an acceptance, right? Of saying that I'll just accept it. It's like, no. You accept that you also deserve to be healthy and safe. Yeah.
Exactly. And then the other thing that I found very helpful is looking for in those experiences that have happened to us that we don't particularly like or that aren't particularly healthy for us. I've worked with veterans, for example, that have been in war. And one of the things that I asked them to look at is, what was the mercy in the experience that you had? One of the Sufi principles is that God's mercy is in everything. So can we look at, what is the mercy in this situation that you were in? And I wasn't sure what the response to that would be. We did a little bit of what the practice of remembrance, which is one of the core principles in Sufism. So we did a little practice with remembrance and then the quality, because there are many what we call divine qualities in Sufism. So we did a little practice with these divine qualities and then sat just quietly after doing those Sufi practices to then ask that question, what was the mercy in this? And honestly, I was astonished at some of the responses that these veterans came up with, and being able to say, oh, I realized I'm not who I am today if I didn't go through that. The experience that I look now at the preciousness of life, I never would have had if I hadn't gone through that awful experience of war. And for them to be able to discover that within themselves has shifted their consciousness around much of the horror of what they experienced. And especially for Vietnam vets who came back to this country not being accepted and not being honored for the work that they did.
And being put into situations often, that's the harm, right? Of being put into
Yeah,
situations which they were not making decisions, and then they were put in those situations, and then they were often the ones that were blamed more than the decision makers, even. Right. Yeah.
exactly.
Wow. Well, there's a lot here to find, and a lot more, as you said. Yeah, when we had set this up, I'd seen that you guys had that you wanted to share something with people, and I want to give people a chance to learn about that, as well as where to find you and follow your work with Sufi University. Before that, I always like to ask people about ways of giving back to the community, and if they are aware of charities or nonprofits. And in this case, you actually work closely with a nonprofit, and maybe you can share about that particular charity with people.
Sure. We work closely with a charity called the Marifa Foundation. And the Marifa Foundation helps the poor and the needy. It also helps support scholarships for the university for people who might not be able to afford to come. It also works in creating healing centers and retreat centers across the globe so that people have a place where they can go to learn more about themselves and to find healing, as well as, most importantly to my heart, is ways of creating world peace.
So these would be ways that it sounds like maybe there's saying on both sides to that, that there's the maybe practical application for those who are in need. And then you're talking about the, well, practical may not be the right word. I don't want to suggest spirituality is not practical, but I mean, there's the nuts and bolts needs, right? And then there's also, you talk about places, it sounds like they're places for meditation, spirituality, exploring those kinds of principles. Yeah. Wow.
Exactly.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that. Where do people find that? Is it Marifa? How do you spell that?
Yeah. Marifa Foundation.
Great. Well, tell people a little bit where they find you, and you've got, as you put it, something to share with people.
Yes, we have a video and audio, as well as a little workbook series to give you a little taste of Sufism and the Sufi spiritual healing. It's called The Five C's of Inner Truth, and you can get that at www.sufinet.org or sufi.net, either one. And you can find me there as well as at sufiu.org.
Great. And that's where people can gain this access to be able to learn about these things, these more
Exactly.
specific,
We
kind of
have
deeper things.
exactly. We have new classes starting every 3 months, and you can take a weekend class or a week-long class or a year class, or if you want an extra degree in Master of Divinity, we offer Masters of Divinity in peacemaking and spiritual ministry and spiritual Sufi healing and living and dying in dignity.
Well, thank you for sharing that with everybody. I want to take just a quick moment to remind everybody, and at the top of the episode, right before we came into the intro, there was our highlighted charity of the month is also mentioned there, and just a reminder that you should go there. You can, just like with your nonprofit as well, you can go if you're able to support. You can look at every website of organizations does, have places where you can help, either donation. Sometimes there's volunteer work and just different things you can do. And as I always like to say, it doesn't cost us anything but a few seconds to throw out a link or share it, as we're already scrolling on our social media and everything to let people know where to find things that mean something to us. And as always, anybody who joins the Broken Brains Patreon, you get access to bonus materials of the episodes, but also 50% of your donation will go to the charity of highlight in the month in which you join, as long as you remain a donor. So, Salima, thank you so much for being here, and thanks for the work you're doing to help people.
Yes, so thank you, and may your podcast continue to have success and benefit many, many people. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Courtemps Arts Podcast Network. To listen to more Courtemps Arts shows, visit courtempsarts.com.
Hello. I am so glad you're here. Welcome to the To Mom is to Love podcast. My name is Valerie Probstveld. I am a nurse practitioner as well as an imperfect mom who loves. In fact, I thought I would be an A-plus mother before becoming a mom. However, as the years passed, I realized love is the only thing I can control. In fact, the verb to mother means to love. Merriam-Webster defines to mom as to give birth or rise, as well as to care for or protect. And just think about it. Love gives birth, allows ourselves and families to rise, and enables us to care for and protect. We have more power as moms than we realize. In 5 generations from now, you will have approximately 30 descendants, and the number keeps getting larger and larger. Motherhood is the most important job in the world. Our mission is to support, encourage, and empower each other as imperfect moms to love as a verb. Come join us as we navigate our shared name, live our verb, and rediscover our identity. Please subscribe, share, and follow. And I would love it if you leave a review so more moms can come join us. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, as well as TikTok and YouTube. Please follow along with us on this beautiful journey we call motherhood.